Hi, so welcome to the first of this summer's Topaz videos. What I want to do in the next 3 videos or so is tell you a little bit about something called Topaz-editor, which is a new tool that I would recommend for creating input files to work with Topaz and Topaz Academic Rietveld refinement software. I guess the first question is, why do we need a new tool for working with Topaz? So if you're part of the Topaz community, you'll know that for the last 20 years or so, a lot of us have used an editor called JEdit to create input files to work with Topaz. So JEdit has been a great friend to the community. I've used it almost daily for 20 years, so it's really served me well. But JEdit has never been without its problems. I think there have always been 3 problems with JEdit. The first problem is that it's always been a rather difficult program to install. So if you haven't got full admin rights on your computer, it's been hard to set Topaz up. And certainly it's been hard for me to automatically update people as I've made changes to JEdit. The second problem with JEdit is it hasn't been actively developed by its user community for about 10 years now. And so as an editor, it's really getting a bit long in the tooth. But the third problem with JEdit, and this is really the big one, is that JEdit is a Java-based editor, so it needs something called Java Runtime Environment installed on your computer to run. So that's JRE. And in the last few years, the licensing around JRE has changed, and certainly UK universities now are a little bit reluctant for you to have JRE running on your computer, which means that the future of JEdit is somewhat problematic. So at the 2024 Padova meeting, a few of us were talking about the need for a replacement for Topaz Editor. And Phil Chater suggested that we looked at VS Code as a potential replacement. So VS Code is a beautiful editor. It's a freely available editor. You can install it easily on lots of different platforms. And it's a really powerful editor. So it's an editor that's developed and used by the programming community. So it has lots and lots of very powerful features in it. One of the beautiful things you can do in VS Code is you can build little extensions. And so what Topaz Editor is it's an extension that runs inside VS Code. And what we've taught that extension to do is we've taught the extension to have menus which let you do a lot of the common things that you want to do with Topaz input files in a very similar way to the menus that were present in JEdit. So the editor works nicely with the Topaz Academic and with the commercial version as well. One of the beautiful things for me is it's very, very easy to install Topaz Editor. And if I make changes on my computer, I can automatically update you with those changes. And then the final thing that's really beautiful is that you can build lots of new powerful features into Topaz Editor that just weren't possible in JEdit. And it also plays nicely with Python. So this lets you build extra analysis scripts around your standard Topaz analysis. And then finally, and we'll look at this in the final video, Topaz Editor integrates very, very nicely with some of the AI models, things like Claude or ChatGPT or Copilot. We can now use those to create input files for us using VS Code and Topaz Editor. And I think what's going to be a very powerful new way. So what I want to do in the next, I think probably 3 videos. In the first video that we're watching now, we'll just go through how to set up Topaz Editor to work with Topaz. We'll very quickly go through a simple Rietveld refinement. We won't go into the theory of Rietveld refinement again, because of course that's covered in the earlier JEdit based videos. And everything that you learned previously in JEdit, you can do in a very, very similar way in Topaz Editor. What we will do is we'll just look at the slight differences between the Topaz Editor and the JEdit setup so that you know what's new and what's changed. In the second video, what I want to do is focus on some of the power editing tricks, some of the new things that are possible in Topaz Editor that weren't possible in JEdit. And then in the third video, we'll look at how you can use artificial intelligence models to work with Topaz input files. So the interfaces to things like Claude or ChatGPT or Copilot, whichever one you happen to like, we've gathered those all together in a single interface, which we're calling Topilot. So that will be in video 3. If you want to set things up, the web page is to tell you how to set up VS Code. The first link is where my laser pointer is now. If you want to set up Topaz Editor, it's the second link in the bottom right of the page. And then if you want to go through the Rietveld example that we'll do live, then it's this link on the very bottom right of the page. So what we'll do next is we'll switch to my desktop and we'll go through setting up Topaz Editor and doing a first Rietveld refinement in Topaz Editor. I'll see you on the desktop in a couple of seconds. Okay, so here we are on my desktop. I'm going to assume that you've already installed VS Code. So what we'll do to start with is we will launch VS Code. And what I've got on my computer is a completely blank version of VS Code that I've never worked with before. So it's just appearing on the left-hand screen here. So here it is. So when you start VS Code up, you'll get a window that looks something like this. Now, the first thing we want to do, let me just maximize it. The first thing we'll do is we'll go to this icon on the left, which says extensions. And a little box will appear. And if we just type in topas-editor, what will happen is it will look on the VS Code Marketplace, and you can click on this to install the latest version of topas-editor. If we just click on the extension name, we get a little screen that comes up which tells us about the software and how it works, the README page. There's a page which is called dependencies, and that tells you the other extensions that will get installed alongside topas-editor, which help it do some of the work it does. If you're happy, all you need to do is click on the install button, and a little window that will come up that says, do you trust me as a publisher, and do you trust the publisher of the other extensions? If you're happy to do so, then you would just click on Trust Publishers and install, and everything will be done for you. Now, what I'd like to do today is use a slightly more advanced version of topas-editor than the one that's currently on the marketplace. By the time you watch this video, the version we'll use today will be live, so you won't have to do this, but I will just install topas-editor in a slightly different way by clicking here. And from now on, everything should be identical to the way that you'll set things up. What will happen in a second is we'll be asked a series of questions about how to install topas-editor, what we want to do. So the first question that pops up is, what kind of color scheme do you want to use? Now, I like to use what's called the Topaz Light color scheme, so I'm going to click on that as my color option. And you can see the background colors have changed. The next question says that it doesn't know what version of the topas-editor menus are being used at the moment, and that's because it's a fresh installation. We're running version 1.2.8 of the software, and it recommends that we update the menus. So let's click on Update. What that does is it writes a whole load of information to a file called settings.json on your computer. And when I set up topas-editor, I try not to break any of the settings of other software. But just in case you get a warning saying, do you definitely want to do this? And in case there's a problem, there is a backup file made. You can nearly always just press yes to this question. The next dialog box says that it hasn't found a valid Topaz directory. So look for your Topaz directory. So if you navigate on your computer, my Topaz on this computer, or the version we're going to use today, is the academic version 8. So I can select that folder and select it as a Topaz directory. As I say, you can use the commercial version of Topaz as well. If you use the commercial version, you might be asked a couple more questions saying, do you want to install an extra couple of files to help topas-editor have all the same features as it would for the academic version? So normally you would just say yes to those questions. And then the next question is to do with the Topilot AI interface to topas-editor. It's asking, do we want to install a set of skills? And we'll talk about this in a couple of videos' time. Do we want to install the skills to let us work with some of the AI tools? Now, I would suggest you always install these tools, because actually some of the non-AI features of topas-editor get installed at the same time. There's a little warning that if you've already got something called Topaz Imprighter skills on your computer, any skills that you've got to do with Topaz will be overwritten, but you can nearly always just click install and you'll set up the very latest version of the AI tools. Okay, and so at that point, we've got everything set up with Topaz and we're ready to go. So what will things look like now? So if I shut this window and I click on this little triangle in the circle icon on the left, what you should find if you click on the triangle in the circle, you should find that you've got a series of menus set up on the left-hand side for working with Topaz. And those look just like the menus that we used to have in JEdit. So the first menu here is a little help menu. So if you click on the help menu, you should get a window pop up which tells you how to do the most common things that you're going to want to do with topas-editor. The next set of buttons are buttons that are probably familiar to you. There's a button for sending an input file to Topaz, one for launching Topaz Academic, one for launching the commercial version of Topaz, one for launching the command line version of Topaz. There's then some help menus. And then if we want to do a very simple Rietveld refinement, what we'd do is we'd go through the Topaz Durham menus here, which are very similar to the old menus in JEdit. So if I expand the Topaz Durham menus, what we'll see is a series of menus here for doing the most common types of things that we would want to do with Topaz. So as I say, let's do a simple Rietveld refinement. So what we'll do is we'll expand this menu, and you'll see now there is a series of 5 things that we need to do. We need to make one choice in each of these 5 sections. So the first choice is we need to select the data file and create an input file. So if I click on this, you get a little window in the bottom right of the screen that pops up, and it tells you what to do. It says navigate to find a raw data file. So the folder that I'm working in now is this Topaz Editor setup one. The data file name that I'm going to fit is this d505005.raw. So I select this as a Topaz compatible data file. And I can overwrite the test file that I had there already. Good, so you can see that we've got some information has appeared in our text editor window, and then there's some instructions saying what to do next. It says select an instrument and then choose whether to do a Rietveld or Pauli fit. So let's select an instrument. The instrument was a copper K-alpha1, K-alpha2 diffractometer with a graphite beam monochromator. So I can click this option here, shut that menu down. The next option is any corrections. I'm going to refine a 0 point on the sample. And then our fourth option is to choose whether to do a Rietveld or a Pauli refinement. Now, if you're used to JEdit, the Rietveld and Pauli menus were completely separate. The way the Topaz editor works allows us to make the menus a little bit more streamlined. So within one menu now, you can choose to do a Rietveld refinement by reading in from a CIF file or an ISO distort file, or enter the structure by hand, or you can choose to do a Pauli fit. So we're going to do a Rietveld refinement. So we'll read in the structure from a CIF file, and the relevant CIF file here is rutile.cif. So I'll click OK, and that reads in the CIF information, and I should have on the screen here everything I need to do a simple Rietveld refinement. So what I can do now is I can send this to Topaz with this button here, or I could just type Control-TS on the keyboard. And you'll see a little window has popped up saying, I've made a backup file for you just in case things go wrong. So if we go to the directory that we're working in, what we should find in the directory that we're working in, and my computer's just gone a little bit quiet for a second. Let me open this. Yeah, so if we go to the directory that we're working in, this file here has been created, a backup file that we could revert to if the refinement went wrong. Okay, so we can launch Topaz Academic by clicking the button here. So it says down the bottom, Topaz Academic is launching. Please wait for it to launch. And my computer today is a little bit slow because I've got a very old laptop, and it uses a lot of resources to record live. So some of the things I'll show you will be a little bit slower than normal, but hopefully they normally work on a reasonable computer. So here's the Topaz screen launch, and I can click on the run button, and I can do a Rietveld refinement in just the way that we always have with JEdit or other methods. Okay, so there's our Rietveld refinement done. Now, of course, when we switch back to Topaz Editor, just like JEdit, knows the color code files. So, for example, refined numbers are colored in red, so it's easy to see what's refining, and non-refined numbers are colored in blue. So you can see that Topaz Editor is very similar to JEdit in a lot of the things that it does. Let's have a look at some of the extra features that are possible in JEdit, in Topaz Editor, sorry. One thing that we've got interface now is a very nice set of help menus. So there are help menus for lots of the things that you'd like to do commonly with Topaz. One of the things you can do is you can launch the new Topaz manual. So then there's a new Topaz manual which is written as a HTML file, so a web page, but it sits locally on your computer, so you can still access it when you're offline. Now, when you set up Topaz editor, if you've got the commercial version of Topaz, you may not have this file on your computer. So if it's not on your computer, the first time you try and launch it, you're prompted to download it from a web page. So it should be available for everybody. This is one of these files that when I'm recording on my laptop, it's a little bit slow to launch, but as I say, on a normal computer, it's fine. So I'm going to switch to a single page view of the help manual. Let me just maximize the screen here. And so this is the new manual. So it's the TechRef manual that used to be in PDF format, but it's now interactive in a very powerful way. On the right hand side, you've got the individual chapters in the manual, so you can just click on the chapters and skip through those very quickly. Of course, you can expand these and you can look at the subsections of the individual chapters. So that's a very quick way of working through. There's some little power features built in, of course. If you click on the help button, it tells you some of these power features. But the couple that I like most are, the first one is the Topaz keywords are written, of course, in orange in the manual. And it turns out for a keyword like HKL_eyes, if I double click on that keyword, then I jump to the part of the manual where that keyword is described in detail. So I can learn all about that keyword very easily. The little back arrow takes me back to wherever I was in the manual. The other thing that's beautiful is if I hold down Control on the keyboard and double click on any keyword, what should happen is you get a little menu appear on the right hand side, which tells you every place in the manual where the word HKL eyes appears. So you can click through and understand its use very, very quickly. So I think that's very nice. The other thing that there is built into the new manual is there's what's called a tree view of the manual. So the tree describes the way in which various keywords interact with each other in Topaz. So in the tree view of the manual, for example, you can click on a keyword that you might be interested in. For example, I might be interested in the magnetism keyword. And what you get if you expand is you get all of the keywords that sit below the magnetism keyword. So for example, if I click on mag space group, I get some information in this little text window all about the magnetic space group keyword. If I click on this little star, then it should switch that from a short summary of that particular keyword. It'll actually load the manual page up on the relevant page so you can see more detail on it. So that view might be helpful for some of you. Good, so that's the help menu. So that's available for you. What's probably more useful on a day-to-day basis is what's called hoverhelp. So if you put your mouse on any keyword now in a Topaz input file, what it will do is it will give you a short piece of information about that keyword and how it works. So that's sort of everyday information on how a keyword works. If you want more information, you can of course click on this view in technical reference, and what that will do is it will load the manual up and it will jump into the manual straight to the page that you want to look at on that particular keyword, so you can find things very, very quickly. So this is my computer being slow again. I've said you can see things very, very quickly. On a normal day, you can see things very quickly, but in a second, that will jump to the page that we're interested in. So yeah, here we go on the left. It's the strict keyword that I clicked on. Okay, so let me shut that down. What else is useful? So that's hoverhelp. Topaz Editor also knows a little bit about Topaz syntax. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, you've entered a structure by hand and you've made a mistake with the space group. Let's say instead of P42 MNM, you've typed in the wrong space group and you've typed in I42 MNM. What happens then is that word gets highlighted. It gets a little orange background and a squiggle underneath it. And if you put your mouse on top of it, it says, well, may not recognize that space group. Topaz may not recognize that space group. There could be a problem. What you can do here is you can click on Open Full List. And again, a web page opens, and it's a local web page that gives you a list of all of the allowed space groups in Topaz. So for example, this is a tetragonal structure. So I can jump to the tetragonal list, and the space group that I actually want is this one here, 102. If I click on it, it copies that space group name to the clipboard. I can go back to Topaz Editor and I can just paste that correct word in. So just to check that I've got things right, let me just run that file through Topaz again and just check. Previously I had an R factor of 14. If I run through Topaz again, yep, I still got the same R factor. So that space group is correct. So it knows about space groups. It knows about atomic site labels as well. Let me just move that menu down. So if you have an atom type that doesn't exist, say you had titanium +3 as your scattering factor, it does know that one. So say you had titanium +1 as a scattering factor, again, that gets highlighted and a little hover comes up saying, unrecognized atom type, try removing the charge. So that will work for site occupancies as well. The other mistake that people commonly make in a Rietveld refinement, particularly if you're working with a trigonal or a hexagonal space group, fractional coordinates like 0.333 have to be entered as a third in Topaz in a trigonal or a hexagonal space group. So again, if you've got one of those coordinates in place, you get a little warning, and if you hover on it, it says, well, maybe you should be typing in a value of a third rather than 0.3333. Okay, so that's some of the syntax recognition it's got. If you're working with these symmetry issues, of course, one of the things that you had to do with JEdit was for an atom like oxygen 1, which is sitting on a position where its X and its Y coordinates have to be restrained by symmetry. In the JEdit way of working, you had to set up the symmetry constraints by hand to work with Topaz. There's a nice new feature that's now part of Topaz Editor that if you highlight a particular str and you do a right click, you get a series of shortcut commands appearing, Topaz Editor commands. What I can do is I can come down and I can say Topaz symmetrize the selection and refine the parameters. And again, what that does in the background is it runs a little Python script which tries to check the symmetry of the space group that you're working in. And what it does is it comes up with some suggestions. Now it knows it's tetragonal, so it thinks that it needs to set the B cell parameter equal to the A cell parameter, which is correct. And here it says for the oxygen coordinate, the Y value should be the same as the X value. So if we click apply, what you find is all of the symmetry constraints have been set up for you automatically. So that can be a really nice way of working. Okay, the other thing that's slightly different about the way we're setting up files in Topaz Editor compared to JEdit is traditionally in JEdit, we've always used a TCHZ peak shape, a pseudo-void peak shape as the default peak shape that's used in the Rietveld refinement. And that used to sit in the stress section of the file. What we've decided to do in Topaz Editor is we've separated that out so it's in a full stress section. And what that means is if you've got more than one structure in your model, the same peak shape gets applied to each of the other structures. And that can be a useful way of working if you use the TCHZ peak shape function to describe the instrumental contribution to the peak shape, so the instrumental resolution function. What you can do in that case is you can fix the peak shape for the instrumental contribution. You would put in appropriate values for your instrument. And then for the sample itself, you could refine, for example, a size and the strain contribution to the peak shape. So again, that gives you perhaps a more sophisticated way of describing the sample and the instrument contributions to the peak shape separately. Another nice thing that you can do is you can input more than one structure in your Rietveld refinement nice and automatically. You can see that this first structure that we've got in the sample dependent parameters have all got labels. The crystallite size contribution for sample 1, crystallite size Lorentzian contribution for sample 1, strain Lorentzian 1, strain Gaussian 1. If you decide to bring in a second input file, and what I'll do is I'll read in from the Topaz stereo menus, I'll read in a second CIF file, I'll read in zinc oxide as another phase. When that gets read in, what happens automatically is the phosphorus section gets written at the bottom of the file to keep everything neat. The new phase, the zinc oxide phase, has been read in, and its peak shape parameters have automatically been renumbered so they are appropriate for phase 2 rather than phase 1. And that's a beautiful trick that Fabio suggested we put in. This zinc oxide example is nice. If you can see, there's a little warning here that's saying for this particular hexagonal space group, maybe these coordinates should be 2/3 and 1/3, not these round numbers. So again, if we were to highlight these and we click on Topaz Editor, Symmetrize Selection, then all of those problems will get sorted out. And if you look at the input file now, what we can see is that those fractional coordinates have been set to 2/3 and 1/3, and the unit cell parameters are refining according to symmetry, so that's great. So let's just take that and let's just delete that file for a second and look at one more thing. What you can also do in Topaz Editor is you can now run TC directly on an input file, so you don't even need to go through Topaz Academic. So let me just set the refinement up to date, say do 100,000 cycles of refinement, and I'll do a continue after convergence so that it does lots of cycles of simulated annealing. And so if I save that file with a Control S on my keyboard, and now if I click on run that file in TC, what will happen is the command line version of Topaz will run in the background. You can see the refinement happening in the background. When you're happy with the refinement, you just click cancel, and that will stop the refinement and save the results. So just for example, let's do that again. Let's set the background coefficients to 0 before we start, so we can actually see that things do get saved. So let's save that file with a Control S, run TC on that file. The RFAT should start high and then come back down to the same low value we've had previously. So let's click cancel, and now you can see that those background parameters have been updated. So running directly on TC can be very quickly. And of course, because we've got these keyboard shortcuts now, all I need to do in general is on my keyboard, I've typed Control TS, Control TC, and everything just happens without you having to do any clicks of the mouse at all. Good, and just finally, the other main Topaz menus, all of the other things that you might like to do in Topaz are under these various menus on the screen here, so you can just click on those to set up other types of refinements. One of the things that's changed versus versus JEdit is we're making a lot more use of pre-written template files. If you select on pre-written templates, what you can do is select a template file, and there are a series of pre-written input files which have got a setup for the most common types of analysis. And particularly if you're working with a more complex type of input file, this is a much quicker way of working than clicking through menus. So for example, let's imagine you've got some time of flight neutron data where you want to fit, say, 5 banks of a time of flight neutron data set and also some X-ray data at the same time. Now that's quite a complicated input file, but there's a template for that. So if we select the template, it asks us to save it as a new file name. So I'll save it as temp.imp, save as imp, and then what happens is that blank file gets read in for you, and it's quite a complicated file because there's lots of sections to this. One of the nice things you can do in Topaz is you can fold these files away so they're much neater looking. There's various ways you can do that. I use that with, I tend to do that with a keyboard shortcut. The keyboard shortcut is Control K0, but if you click in the VS Code and Topaz commands, that menu's there for you. This whole input file now is just written as little sections, and basically the rule with one of these templates is anywhere in the template where you see purple text, you need to replace that with information specific for your refinement. So in this case, all you would do is you would put the file name that you're refining here and the name of the X-ray file in this macro here. And then later on in the file, in the structural section, there will be another section which is colored in purple. And so you would need to replace this purple section with your structural section. So there's lots of those templates available for doing different types of analysis. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a bit of a quick view of how Topaz Editor works. The key things are, I think it's very quick to set up Topaz Editor. You'll get automatic updates from me whenever I update things. And it's really easy to introduce new functionality to Topaz Editor. So if there's something missing that you'd like to see after you've watched these first few videos, then let me know and we can try and put that in. So I hope that's been useful. And in the next video, we'll look at some of the power editing tricks that are available in Topaz Editor. Okay, bye for now.